Modern food packaging has abandoned the single material systems of the past. Instead of a uniform block of plastic, a modern container is an architecture of highly distinct components: dense paperboards, specialized barrier plastics, and reactive chemical adhesives. To that foundation, formulators add dispersion coatings, external UV-cured inks, and post-consumer recycled content. All of these disparate chemistries are then compressed and extruded together, forming what appears to be a single micro-thin functional sheet. The industry relies on this structural complexity to meet strict, overlapping demands, balancing mandatory sustainability targets with extended shelf life and physical durability. These hybrid structures brilliantly solve the physical engineering challenges of modern retail, but by forcing distinct chemical profiles to interact under pressure, they engineer a completely new class of regulatory vulnerability. This introduces a dangerous paradox into modern packaging development.
OnlyTRAININGS. Learn what works in the industry.
A package built entirely from components that are 100% compliant in isolation will routinely fail regulatory safety standards when combined. This specific vulnerability is the focus of hybrid food contact materials, managing EU, FDA, and NIAS compliance risks. The primary error R&D teams make is evaluating these new packages using old compliance models that were built for simple, monolithic plastics. Those legacy models assume that chemical migration behaviors are linear, stable, and highly predictable. In a multi-material matrix, that stability disappears. Chemical migration becomes multi-directional, highly reactive, and dependent on the adjacent layers. Understanding this intersecting physical chemistry and navigating the divergent legal logic between the European Union and the FDA is the only reliable way to avoid late-stage scale-up failures. The risk often starts in the procurement and R&D phases, driven by a dangerous assumption regarding supplier documentation. A development team will source an FDA-approved coating, a fully compliant adhesive, and a cleared paperboard, assuming that stacking these legal materials automatically yields a legal package. This additive logic fails because it ignores nonlinear migration. Molecules do not respect original boundaries. Chemicals from the adhesive freely cross the interface into the coating or migrate into the paperboard. Introduce heat and this escalates. High manufacturing temperatures alter these migration vectors, accelerating the rate substances cross layer boundaries. The environment continues to manipulate the system after manufacturing. Long storage durations and specific food matrices, like highly acidic or fatty contents, further mutate how substances move across polymer and paper divides. An adhesive perfectly stable on a glass slide can become highly volatile when sandwiched between a moisture-retaining paperboard and a restrictive plastic barrier. System-level compliance is dictated entirely by the physical interactions at these material interfaces. Component-level approvals are functionally irrelevant on their own. This cross-layer reactivity directly drives the generation of non-intentionally added substances, or NIAS. A hybrid packaging structure acts as an exponential multiplier for these unknown impurities. In a single-layer plastic, a NIAS might be a simple trace impurity from a raw material. In a multi-layer system, NIAS are entirely new, distinct compounds created post-assembly. The first major generation pathway is unexpected curing reactions between adjacent functional layers. If an adhesive reacts with a specific chemical in a surface ink, it generates a new molecule that immediately begins migrating away from the interface. The second major pathway stems from structural degradation. The inclusion of recyclable or bio-based layers often introduces unmapped particulate matter that breaks down over time, leaching directly into adjacent, cleaner barrier layers. Advanced barrier layers complicate this further. Designed to keep oxygen out, they intentionally block molecular movement, which can trap these newly formed NIAS compounds inside the structure and force their migration inward toward the food rather than venting outward. Without explicitly mapping these cross-layer chemical reactions and degradation pathways, accurately predicting the toxicological profile of a hybrid package is physically impossible. Moving from physical chemistry to regulatory logic reveals that the law governing these materials is just as fragmented as the structures themselves. The European Union and the US FDA define compliance boundaries for multi-material packaging using entirely different logical frameworks. The EU framework categorizes a coded structure based on its dominant material composition, applying strict generalized migration limits to the entire system. The FDA approaches the exact same structure differently, viewing it through the lens of individual food contact notifications or specific indirect additive clearances based on the intended use conditions. Because of this divergence, a hybrid structure might legally qualify as a regulated plastic under one regime, but be classified and regulated as a paper product under the other. The operational consequence is severe. A testing protocol that perfectly satisfies EU regulatory logic can, and frequently will, be completely rejected during an FDA submission. Applying single material logic to multi-material hybrid designs or treating global compliance as a single standard guarantees regulatory rejection in critical international markets. The final risk factor is administrative, the severe fragmentation of technical documentation across the modern supply chain. To build a modern package, a brand owner sources barrier plastics, dispersion coatings, and adhesives from entirely different global suppliers. Each supplier provides technical documentation that is strictly limited to their own isolated component. This creates an intentional data void at the exact point of highest risk, the chemical interface where one supplier's layer makes physical contact with another's. This lack of interface data critically compromises the brand owner's ability to calculate worst-case migration scenarios. The analytical model breaks down because variables dictating cross-layer interaction are completely missing. Suppliers are rarely incentivized to test their proprietary materials against every possible hybrid combination on the market. Relying on this fragmented documentation creates a massive analytical blind spot, effectively transferring 100% of the liability for unknown interactions onto the final packager. The industry-wide transition toward sustainable, hybrid, and monomaterial packaging is non-negotiable. To survive this transition without facing massive product recalls, R&D and regulatory teams must completely abandon the practice of simple component verification. Packaging architectures must instead be evaluated holistically, treating them as unified, highly interactive chemical systems. This requires developing a structural design logic that preemptively accounts for NIAS generation pathways before the materials are ever combined. It also demands proactive, aggressive supplier coordination to bridge the technical data gaps at the material interfaces. Mastering this system-level evaluation is the only reliable method to prevent late-stage scale-up failures and protect commercialization timelines. The Hybrid Food Contact Materials Training by OnlyTRAININGS provides the definitive technical blueprint for managing these complex risks. This curriculum is built specifically for packaging technologists, formulation scientists, and compliance managers handling FDA and EU regulations. The course explicitly provides advanced strategies for reducing documentation uncertainty and practically modeling worst-case migration scenarios. Crucially, this training is designed and taught by active industry professionals dealing with scale-up realities, not academic theorists. The program delivers a functional, actionable framework for material selection, NIAS risk assessment, and bulletproof documentation planning. Secure your specialized training certificate via the link in the description and ensure your team has the expertise to close the compliance gap in your next packaging rollout.